Hello and welcome to Weltall podcast, where we curse the blasted sun and its light to the point of wishing eternal night upon the world. I'm your host, Inro Whiteline, and as always, I'm glad to present my co-host, Zach. Hi
Hello.
there. So, how's the weather treating you?
How's what?
The weather.
It's hot. It's very hot. I noted. I've heard it. I've heard you say that it's raining over at your place, and it doesn't rain here. Here, it's
Yeah.
very hot.
It's supposed to be hot right now, I suppose. It's just that for some reason it's hot like everywhere in the world right now, so I
Yeah, I
suppose
think.
shouldn't be so careless about nature.
Yeah, I think there's a name for that. I think it's called summer.
Yes. Anyway, as I have referenced back then, we are going to discuss a certain Kazakh Bay today, and besides that, we really don't have much to discuss today. Usually, we discuss the latest news before going into detail on our subject of the episode, but today we don't really have much to say. We have
Except that the Shiro and Ellie tapestry is
yes,
very is
uh, the,
amazing.
yes. Basically, Light are going to take part in Denkigai Matsuri, as they usually do. It's a biannual event which usually concerns video games, including visual novels, and it's just another way for the publishers to sell their merchandise. And Light are going to sell a brand new tapestry with Shiro and Ellie, uh, and some other merchandise which they either haven't revealed yet or have already been selling for quite a while now, like previous tapestries, soundtracks, and so on.
Acrylic
Yes.
figures, etc.
Yeah, for now we only have the tapestry of Shiro and Ellie, we have the Jiyusuke artworks and animation soundtrack, which are going to be released like a day after Denkigai Matsuri begins, so they figured that they can sell some in advance. And that's about it for now. Anything else we can say about the tapestry besides the fact that it's amazing?
Um, Shiro should be topless more often. I don't know. That's about all that comes to mind. I mean,
Well, he's also sitting on the eighth seat
which yeah,
of the
that's
general
fitting.
table.
Yeah, he's sitting on a Rosaka seat.
Yes, which I suppose says that the Mari ending is canon, because that's the only ending where he actually gets Rusalka's
On an
on
herb.
an herb. Yeah, and that also means that Kasumi is the only character without the tapestry for now.
Well, technically, Ren doesn't have one either. Technically,
Well, he has one alongside Mari, and I suppose that's just fine.
is that well? It's not considered an LDO tapestry, but yes.
Yeah. Anyway, there was an idea mentioned on Twitter that Kasumi might get Babylon tapestry somewhere down the line, and I suppose all the Kasumi fans will finally have their time. And
Yeah, but I don't know if that'll happen. It's such a. It's not a. It's such a small thing for like her getting it on an airbay at some point was such a small thing that it's I don't know about that.
yeah, it's just like checking the boxes at this point, basically,
Yeah,
and making the Kasumi fans happy, which is not
that's not a bad
small.
thing at all.
Yes. Alright, so that's basically all we have for today. Hopefully, we will have something more to talk about next time when uh, Light will probably have another episode of their own uh, stream released. And until then, we are going to discuss Wilhelm, who actually had his birthday not too long ago. And that's why we actually figured we might as well dedicate an entire podcast to him. And luckily he also has his own spin-off game. He also pretty popular among fans, so it was a
I'm of the opinion, and some might disagree with me here, but I'm of the opinion that he's the character that received the most character development over the course of the franchise.
yeah. We are going to discuss that as well, but for now, uh, let's
But like regardless of discussion, that's part of why I think he's a really good character to open up with because, like I said, he's gotten so much development. There's a lot to talk about. So.
yeah, right, but hopefully we won't take as long as last time today.
Yeah, I doubt that would happen, but
Yeah,
yes.
anyway, let's turn back a bit and remember what we saw the first time he was introduced to us. So, for now, let's just read his official biography, which is pretty short. A man with a long criminal record who served as the first lieutenant for the infamous 36th Waffen Grenadier Division of the SS. An albino, he shuns all light, especially that of the sun. In return, all his senses magnify in the darkness, almost as if he was a vampire. Having embraced that nature of his as part of his identity, Wilhelm's designation and fondness for vampiric characteristics is no coincidence. So, what did you think of him the first time you saw him?
That's a good
It
question.
may be in the game or outside the game.
No, of course. Well, he was like this, like the crazy, hot-headed, like
Yeah,
dangerous character that appears first. Like, I wouldn't say that I saw him as a chinpiga, as a punk.
yes,
When I first saw him, I just thought he was, like a lunatic that beats people up.
yeah,
And like I think that it helps create a good first impression for the LDO because the first two characters you see are Rusalka and Wilhelm, and they actually serve as a interesting kind of. They're two very different characters who, like, we know they get along, we know they're partners,
yes,
but
and they are similar in a way.
and they are similar in a way. But you have Wilhelm, who's the muscle,
Yes,
the
the
muscle, the
brawn.
violent, the brawn, yes, and then you have Rusalka, who's more of the brain, shall we say. And they kind of help set the LDO, kind of help define the LDO, because the LDO aren't just the brawn, they're also the brain. They're like
Yes,
a
and
lot of,
Wilhelm himself is not really just all muscle.
no,
He's
no,
also
he's
really
definitely,
smart, and that's what makes him dangerous, actually.
I wouldn't say he's smart. I
Well,
would say that well, maybe street smarts would be the
yeah,
correct
yeah,
way.
basically.
But he's kind of like Schreiber, and I would be killed by Wilhelm if you were to hear me say that. But he's kind of like Schreiber in the sense that they both have animalistic almost instincts. They fight like savages, like savage animals, and they're like extremely good at surviving, which is And when you look back, and we will get to his background, but when you get into his background, you kind of realize how he became who he was.
Yeah,
But
and
yes,
we can say right away that we are going to discuss some material which is not released in English yet, but we will
yes.
try to keep it as spoiler-free as possible.
Hmm.
Anyway, so as for me, the first thought I got when seeing him was actually it's the mid boss. Like he's a stereotypical mid boss who is going to die like in the first 4 chapters of the game or something like that, and he's going to come back and again and again to be defeated by the protagonist, and that's basically all there is to him. Well, maybe with a slight wrinkle that I expected him to become a bit more monstrous in the latter half. Like it does happen quite often when uh, the mid boss is not satisfied with his performance, and he makes a contract with the devil and becomes even more powerful, except that here he has already done it by the beginning of the game, and that's basically what describes him pretty well. Like he has gone past all the power-ups that can ever be possible, and he's at his peak performance at the very beginning of the game. So it's the protagonist who has to rise up to his level.
I'm sorry, and I have to mention this because he's a vampire, but I reject my humanity, Jojo.
Yes. Well, he does have a mask of sorts, I suppose.
Sort of, kind of.
Anyway, so while we do have a slight plan for today, this is the first time we are doing a character-centric episode, so we are kinda at the crossroads right now. So we either can discuss his role in the story right away, or we can discuss all the different symbols that Masuda has put into his character. And I suppose we can begin with his designation, which has been mentioned in his bio. So, what is designation anyway?
The designations that the characters give are in Japanese are called mana, which is their magical or demonic names, which every member of the LDO received from Mercurius, with the exception of Kay, who did not receive her from Mercurius, but received hers from Trifa, because of the circumstances regarding her joining the LDO.
Well, I suppose Trifa may have gotten it from Mercurius in a roundabout way.
Kichikan.
Yes.
But the designations very often draw from from some kind of literary work or opera or some kind of historical character, which has some kind of ironic or direct relation to the character's past or craving.
Yes, and it should be noted here that it both denotes their strengths as long as their weaknesses, or to be a bit more specific, their curse, so to say.
Their karma.
Yes, so no matter what they do, they cannot escape whatever this designation imposes upon them. So, taking Wilhelm, for example, his designation is Kazaklu Bey, or basically the Impaler.
The Impaler Prince.
Yes, this is the name which was given to Vlad III by the Turks, who have been slaughtered by him and his troops in the name of faith. Which means that Bey himself, no, we'll say Wilhelm for now, but after this they are basically synonymous. So Wilhelm is a warrior, first and foremost. Not only that, but he is also strongly associated with vampires in general. As you may know, Vlad III is the prototype of Dracula from Bram Stoker's novel, who is basically the origin of all modern vampire depictions.
It's also worth noting that the Kazakhl Bey moniker was given to Vlad Tepes because of a certain feat, which we don't know if it actually happened, but apparently he scared an entire army away from the battlefield by placing the heads of other soldiers, which he slew before, impaled on pikes.
Yes.
Across the battlefield, which, as you said, was all done in the name of faith, which is also another point that's kind of worth focusing on, but we'll get to that in a bit.
Yes, and what should also be noted here again, that it's not just a blessing, it's also a curse, because in the end Vlad III was defeated despite his best efforts. So even though he tried so hard to protect his faith, his motherland, he couldn't actually do it. And the same goes for Wilhelm, because in the end, no matter how hard he tries to defend himself, to defeat his enemies, he's always doomed to lose both what he possesses and what he may gain over the course of his countless battles. And the same can go over every other designation, but that's what it basically means for him. He's a warrior who is doomed to lose. And before we go, we can touch some more upon the point of faith, I suppose. So, he is actually one of the most devoted members of the LDO. He basically admits that he has fallen in love with Reinhardt to some extent. And that's actually what drives him to move on even nowadays. Like, he's not really a complicated character, like, well, he is, but his motivation really isn't. Like, he found the strongest being he ever seen, and he admits his superiority and does everything in his strength to promote his cause, so to say.
Yes, there's a part in an audio drama, the Machina's audio drama, where even though it's Machina's audio drama, you actually get to hear what the other characters of the LDO were doing and thinking at the time.
All of them, basically.
Yes, basically all of them. It's actually very illuminating about the things that happened immediately after the second side story.
Yes.
So basically, you see Wilhelm Rusalka, who is now called Rusalka, by the way. By that point, she's already changed her name. And
no one actually calls her that.
Yes. Yes, but you see Wilhelm Rusalka and Spine meeting up for the first time in a few years after they've all been running around Europe under war, killing and amassing souls, and basically they discuss how Glasheim probably changed, how Wewelsburg Castle has probably changed, and Spine expresses concern that the change might be for better, might be for worse, and who knows what the Lord Heydrich is doing, and Wilhelm basically goes around and says, whatever he's doing, it'll be good. It doesn't matter. You don't worry about it. You're thinking too hard. If Lord Heydrich is doing it, it'll be heaven for us. Don't worry.
Yeah, or for him in particular.
For him in particular, but it's worth noting that, and this is a bit jumping onwards. In Interview with Kazakal Bey, you actually see him interact. You see Wilhelm's interactions with the other LDO members in around 1943, 1942, and you see it from his perspective, of course, and you actually see that he gets along really well with Eleonore.
Yes.
He and Eleonore, they get along fairly well, and Eleonore is that kind of character, so having her treat you more or less with dignity is a feat. Yeah. But you see them getting along, and it makes sense because they're both about as equally devoted to Reinhardt, and it's that's saying a lot.
They share common hobbies. Let's put it that way. Anyway,
hobbies.
So that about does it for the designation, and since we have started talking about Wilhelm's origin, we might as well talk about his childhood.
Yes.
So this was mostly covered in Interview with Kazakal Bey, but it has been mentioned in passing in the original visual novel, so it's mostly nothing new, although some details are pretty illuminating, so to say. So, as you may have known, his mother was his older sister.
Yes.
Anyway, so he was born of an uh, very poor family. His father basically treated him like dirt. He lived in a literal box. Because he was born an albino, which is probably because of the incestuous relationship between his parents, he couldn't really go out during the day. So he had to sleep in his box, which served as his bed, and only go out during the night. And because his parents didn't care, well, his mother did care, but she was usually busy getting beaten up or sleeping, so to say.
She was at work.
Yes, yes. There was no one to feed him or care about poor Wilhelm, so he had to produce for himself. He first started with cockroaches, with mice, and other small vermin, and as he got used to his uh, unwilling role of a hunter, he moved on to larger game. So he moved on to cats, to dogs, to babies, and over time he actually moved on to actual humans. And somewhere along the way, he realized that he is basically what others call a vampire. He sleeps in a box during the day, he hunts during the night, he drinks and feeds on human flesh and blood, and that means that he is an immortal vampire. But what is really curious about this realization is that, as we have mentioned, he had no education to speak of. So he had no actual way to learn about these so-called vampires. And he actually took it as yet another proof of him being an actual vampire. Like, why else would I know about my status as a vampire if I wasn't one? Which again brings us back to the idea of foreknowledge, and you better get used to it if you haven't yet already.
Thanks, Snack.
Yep. Anyway, but there was one small problem with this realization. If he is an immortal vampire, how come he was born of these scumbags? So, there was a contradiction which he had to resolve
Correct.
in some way. Yeah, and well, he's a simple man, so he decides to just burn it down. He kills his father, he kills his mother, and beds her along the way, so she becomes his first sexual experience, which actually makes her pretty happy for some strange reason, as if she has fulfilled her role.
Helga was off her rocker regardless of her son's condition.
Yeah. Anyway, so he kills his parents, he burns down his house, and so he becomes reborn as a full-fledged vampire. He has no past to speak of anymore, so he can live his life however he wants. So he lives on the street, he hunts people, he uh, uh, makes his fighting style more and more polished, so to say, even if it's not uh, anything you would call a martial art. It would still be as deadly as something Eleanor would use. So anyways, that goes on until he meets Schreiber on the night of Christmas 1939. And that's when he meets Reinhard. That's when he meets someone who is actually more powerful than he is, and that's when he swears allegiance to him, basically. And
there's a little more to that story, actually.
yeah, of course.
Yeah, but it's worth noting that it's covered in the side story, but his big rivalry with Schreiber started because they were both white-haired serial killers, and Schreiber was probably a lot less discreet than he was, because thanks to Schreiber, the police had started chasing Wilhelm. They saw a white-haired urchin stalking people in the night, and so that he basically got Wilhelm in trouble, and Wilhelm decided to waste him.
It's impressive that Wilhelm was never actually caught along the way.
He was,
not
I
only
guess,
because he just killed everyone in his way, but also because he actually bothered to be stealthy about it.
yeah, he was. Vampires are good at masking their
Yes,
presence in the night, so I guess he took after that. I'm assuming he stalked his targets, and at the very least, there weren't any eyewitnesses. While with Schreiber, there might have been more, because Schreiber thinks less than Wilhelm, which is saying a lot.
yes.
Um,
There's a literal hole in his head.
Yes. But yes, the other part is that after they're caught by Reinhard, they're basically subjected to experiments by him and Karl Kraft, as they were actually the first people to receive Ewigkeit. They were basically guinea pigs. And the first one to submit himself to it was actually Schreiber. Hence, Schreiber is the fastest one. He was the first to receive the blessing, and that's something that Wilhelm would come to resent decades later, and comes to a head in Rhea's Root.
Yeah.
And generally in Dies Irae,
Yeah.
Schreiber is Schreiber is the person Wilhelm hates the most out of the LDO. So
yes.
Yeah.
So that's basically his origin. I suppose we can also talk about his Anenerbe while we're at it. His Anenerbe is called. It actually got a few names so far. So originally it was called Clifford Bachikal, which is the opposite of the Sephiroth, basically. So
a cliff off is
yes.
the Vatikal is one of the spheres of the cliff off.
Yes. So if Sephiroth are the emanations of the god's works, the cliff off are the emanations of the devil's work. They are the polar opposites. Which is actually pretty unusual for the LDO, because they are usually take the names of their Anenerbe from some literary works, from actual history, while Wilhelm actually got it from religion. Anyway, so with all the Anenerbe, we have the English title, so to say, even if it's mostly German, and the Japanese title. In this case, the Japanese is the Dark Gift, which is pretty straightforward. It's something which is given, not just something dark which is given to him, but mostly like the gift of darkness, so to say, because it actually darkness given form, basically. And
It's also worth noting that it's the actual crystallized blood of
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 Vlad the
Vlad
Third,
of
yes,
Vlad the Third. Yes.
which was actually procured by Rusalka.
Yeah, she received it. She received it from Valerian Triffa in 1939.
Yes. And another name which was given to it in interview with Kazakh Lubey is Kiss in the Dark, which is a bit. I'm not sure it was needed.
Well, no, I don't think it was a. I don't think it was an actual. It was the actual title. It was just something stylistic that
Well, I
that
think
was
it was
added.
mentioned as a name somewhere. Well,
It wasn't quite. It was just added into the story. Like at some point, you could see like that it's written as Yami no Tamamono, the gift of the
yeah,
dark,
yeah, yeah.
and in the furigana it would say Kiss in the Dark. But it's a little more like it's kind of like something. I think it was just something that Wilhelm added for his story to Dinah.
Yeah, yeah. So
Dinah.
it uh, it may contradict our story so far, but Wilhelm is a bit of a womanizer, and he does know how to do things with style. So he is not beyond giving extra names for extra flourish.
Yes, not at all. But yes, it's also kind of probably kind of an acquired thing because it also kind of represents his relationship with the form his Ananurbe takes in his inner world, which is the form of his mother Helga. So the kiss in the dark, which is like his overdoting, overly adoring, suffocating lover of a mother.
Yes. Anyway, as you have said, it takes form of a crystallized blood of Vlad III, which still flows in Wilhelm's veins and can actually take form of huge blood crystals, which he uses to skewer his opponents.
Yes, and that's actually is Yetzirah.
Yes,
But
which
uh,
is
uh,
yet another reference to his designation.
yes, but a point worth kind of mentioning is that in regards to his past and how his power works, and the whole thing with the blood, with the crystallized blood, is that there was a certain part of his desire was to completely squeeze out all of the impure blood he received from his parents and replace it with like the blood of his enemies or with
Yes,
vampiric
yes, indeed.
blood, so as to become a vampire. And he kind of does that with the Ananurbe. It's also worth noting that he's probably the most vivid example we have of a fusion type Ewikite user.
Yes,
Uh,
there are four types of Ewigkeit, which are the fusion, the equipment, I believe, the event, and others, so to say. So the fusion type is characterized by huge offensive potential, but is much more difficult to control. And Wilhelm is really a notebook example of that.
it also has the added advantage of, since the Ananurbe is inside of the user's body, it's a lot harder to damage the Ewikite user by destroying the relic itself.
Yeah, so it may feel like he is all offense and no defense, but it's actually a bit more complicated than that.
Yes,
So,
certainly.
but crystallized blood is just one form the Ananurbe takes. It also takes another form within Wilhelm's soul, which is again the form of Helga, his mother's sister. Uh, which we have mentioned it before in some previous episode, but actually this relic has such great attunement with Wilhelm that it takes form of something as suffocatingly loving as the Ananurbe is, which is basically Helga. Uh,
It's in the words of Mercurius, the gift of dark loves Wilhelm. It
Yes,
loves him in a obsessive manner.
yes, which is a bit weird when you talk about an inanimate object, but it's, well, not really inanimate.
It's not, no, it's not. And I remember coming to the conclusion after reading Interview with Cousin Bit that it's actually entirely reasonable that soul-eating cursed items, because the point, one of the points about Ananerbe is that while they have a hunger for souls, the soul they want to consume the most is the soul of their user. So
Yes,
it's kind of an exchange it becomes where Helga basically urges Wilhelm to fight and use his power and kill out of a desire to eventually consume him entirely and completely. And it's also got that kind of motherly sort of distorted perception of like a return to the womb, um,
yeah,
which is it's messed up. We're not gonna treat like it's we're not gonna act like it's not, but that's just how. But it also fits with how insane Wilhelm actually is. But yes, but a conclusion I came to is that it makes perfect sense that a evil soul-eating artifact would want to consume the soul of his user,
yeah.
with the only exception being Mari, who is a very unique Ananarbe.
Yes, yes. But yeah, you can basically see it in the form of the Wewelsburg Longinus, which is basically constantly feeding on the soul of its host, uh, even despite the intentions of the
Creator.
said host. Yes, and that's basically the origin of the Sakurai curse. Uh, we can go along and mention his craving, which is a bit more complicated.
Because
Uh,
there's more than one, arguably.
yes. So originally his craving was to uh, become a
Become,
vampire.
become someone who's invincible under the night.
Yes, basically. Which is, well, you may guess why it happened, because he lived during the night and figured that he's a vampire, so he should be immortal, as vampires are. But it turned out to be a bit more complex, because his craving is actually one of the few which combines the traits of the Hado and Gudo, so hegemony and transcendence. So
Yes.
not only does it affect Wilhelm himself, it also affects his environment. Uh, the former is a form of transcendence and the latter is of hegemony. Because of that, not only does he become stronger during the night, he also becomes he also
Generates an artificial night.
yes, yes, and that also puts him pretty close to Reinhardt, who is also similar in that regard, in that he becomes stronger through his surroundings and empowers everyone who surrounds him. This is actually also the reason Wilhelm may have his LDO number. So we have mentioned before that Machina sits right in the middle of the Obsidian Round Table. He is given the number 7, which means he is the seat of the scale, so to say. The rest of the Orden lies in balance on his shoulders. Which, if you
So he
take
has
another step,
6 on each side. Yeah.
yes. So if you take a step further, that means that if you go closer to Reinhardt, you also get the LDO members who are closer to him in some regard. And if you go closer to Mercurius, you get the LDO members who are closer to Mercurius in some regard. So in Wilhelm's case, he is both, of course, devoted to Reinhardt, but he is also embodies a concept of hegemony itself. Because between him and Reinhardt, you only have Cain, who exemplifies the concept of Anenerbe and what it does, and he does have an entire legion within himself.
I guess he also kind of represents an area because he's an undead soldier.
Yes, of course. And you have Trifa, who is literally Reinhard, but with a different soul. Oh,
Yes.
this is not really literally Reinhard, but you get my idea. So Wilhelm has a number 4, which not only means that he is the LDO member of the Cancer zodiac sign, but he is also in the Reinhard win, so to say. And Wilhelm's Bria, as we have mentioned, is him creating an artificial knight. And what it also does is it gives him extra traits which he doesn't usually possess, which are usually given to vampires, like being weak to silver, to crosses, to well, I'm not sure he's weak to garlic anyway, but something like that. And he also constantly drains power from his surroundings. So he may not drink blood literally, but he still acts as a vampire while his Bria is active.
Yes.
And he can support it while he has the soul fuel, so to say, but unfortunately he cannot control it, because that's not really what he intended with his craving. He doesn't really care about others. He cares about himself first and foremost, and that's why it's pretty difficult to fight side by side with Wilhelm.
Yes, but it also has. Wilhelm is an interesting case because not only is it really hard to fight with him, it's also hard on him to fight with other Elokite users because the more Elokite users with cravings, Elokite users capable of Bria, who have cravings are within this sphere of influence, the harder it is for him to maintain it because he basically acts he basically acts like the god of that area. So the more powerful cravings exist in there, the less is capable of the less influence his has.
Yes. So like I said, he is a prime example of a hegemonic craving.
Yes.
What else there is to say? So he can control the area to some extent, although it's not that easy because he tends to go berserk because he is a fusion type, so he doesn't really think about controlling anything. He just lets it all happen, and whatever it is, it's probably good for him. But there is a point in interview with Kazaklubey where he makes an effort to change his area of effect, even if it's not really what you would expect. Like, it's not that useful.
Yes.
Okay. We can go on and mention... I suppose we can talk about his area while we are talking about his Bria.
Yes.
So, the name of his Bria is Der Rosenkavalier Schwarzwald, which combines two different references, so to say. The first is Der Rosenkavalier, which is pretty obvious because his entire area is a reference to Der Rosenkavalier. And the other is Schwarzwald, which just well, it's not anything specific, I believe. It's just Black Forest in German, which does have a lot of these green woods which don't let any sunlight in through its branches, so it's basically a reference to all of that. But the Rosenkavalier is a bit more interesting because as most LDO members and their arias do, it's a reference to an opera, except that in Wilhelm's case it's not an opera by Wagner. It's actually written by Richard Strauss, and it's one of the few literary works which are referenced, which is written in the 20th century. I can discuss its plot here, but I'm not sure it has any meaning to Wilhelm actually. It's basically a romantic comedy where you have various people falling in love with each other and trying to be happy. Let's put it that way.
It does have the notable trait of being a bit controversial because it kind of has to do with like infidelity, sexual predation. Like it's it's a comedy, but it does have some questionable themes which might kind of relate to Wilhelm's birth being one of questionable origins as well.
Yeah, and I'm not really sure if it was actual. I can say that this entire opera was written as a reference of sorts to the older operas. So Strauss was trying to add as many references to the tropes of the past, so it might have been one of them. And he also has some anachronisms, but well, it's all fine in the end, I think. So, what actually does that mean for Wilhelm? Why would his aria be from a romantic comedy? Well, as we have already discussed, his Annenerbe is basically in love with him. So, in reciting this aria, which is also basically the main character tells the main heroine that he is in love with her, who is called Sophie. Yeah. In doing so, he admits his love for his Annenerbe and by doing so, he activates his Bria. What is also worth mentioning here is that he also his aria is one of the few which adds to the original script. He has 2 extra lines which are not in the opera itself, which are Sophie welcome these show a corpse. And while it does make it all fit Wilhelm much better, I'm actually of the opinion that they could have used it without any extra addition.
Sophie Wilkins is fine. Show a corpse is just weird because it's in English.
Yes, and then
it's
you have the Japanese pronunciation of it.
Shigayo Sagase.
Yes.
Yes. Well, it also kind of relates to his main love interest in Interview with Kazuko Bay, because the subtitle of Interview with Kazuko Bay is Kageochigo Hatsukoi yo, Wiver, My First Love, with the main character there being described as his first love, because his intercourse with his mother wasn't entirely one made out of love.
Yes, that is true.
But yes, another point about Interview with Kazuko Bay, and you can't escape Interview with Kazuko Bay
Yeah,
when
it's fine.
is that one of the climax scenes actually has Helga and Wilhelm reciting the opera to each other, and that's a very powerful scene.
Yes.
Uh, that's kind of, it's probably one of my favorite arias in the series in general, even though
Well, it is probably the longest of them all. He got like two different areas, and then he either uses one of them or just combines them into a single one, like in the climax
yeah,
scene
it's the
Wicked.
it's the longest one of it's the longest version of his aria, but it's very it's very atmospheric seeing them kind
Yes.
of recite it to each other, mostly because both Wilhelm and Elga's voice actors are extremely talented,
Yeah,
and
so we kind of glanced
it's a
over
joy
it,
to listen.
but Wilhelm Ehrenburg is voiced by Kishot Anyama, who is amazing, and
Yes, he's
who you may have heard as a singer of Grand Rodeo. You may have heard him as Kitan in Gurren Lagann, or as Satan in Needless, and many other roles.
yes.
And I do believe that Kisho is one of the main reasons Wilhelm is so great, which
It's something that I discussed with a friend of mine. Started reading Dies Irae recently, and we
yeah,
talked about it. We talked about Willem, and I just told him that like Willem's voice acting is amazing because you can actually see him drooling like a starved
yeah,
vampire as
like
he
you have
talks.
this static sprite on the screen, but you actually can see him like twitching and drooling as he talks about him, like barely containing his excitement about fighting someone
Yes,
with an
and
actual chance.
yeah, and it's also like, and you can also hear like the sexual titillation in his voice. You can see him like he gets off on fighting strong enemies. So when
Yes.
you see Shiro or Ren or Schreiber, like especially with Schreiber's, especially in the Schreiber fight in Resrid after he activates his, yeah, you can almost hear him like he sounds
Yes.
like he's sexually excited by it, out of the idea of butchering Schreiber. So yes, in general, you can say that like the voice actors are a big part of what made the series characters so memorable.
Indeed.
But with Wilhelm, it's like so his performance as well is so strong. It's like one of the most powerful cases because I might get stoned for this, but with Reinhard, with Junichi Suwabe, like it's an extremely impressive performance. But Junichi Suwabe. You heard him as Archer. You heard him in many other works. So it's not like with Wilmer, where I feel like Kisho took that role like over the edge in a way.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
like it's one of his strongest performances in anything. Um, so yes, it's that strong of a performance. His performance is definitely like in the top three
Yes.
performances Dies Irae, as in my opinion at least.
We can also mention that Kisho is a bit of a pervert himself, so that probably helped. Uh,
Yes, Shiro's. Yeah, Kisho has a dirty mouth.
yes. Anyway, so going back to the aria, it's actually pretty weird that Wilhelm is one of the most brutish members of the LDO, and yet his aria is one of the most sentimental ones, which is one of his inner contradictions, really. Like, he, uh, on one hand, he does make an effort to make connections to people. He actually craves human interactions in one way or another, but he knows that nothing good will ever come out of it, so he doesn't really bother with making a good impression or anything like it. Uh, mm, uh, it's actually mentioned like his name itself is pretty uh, weird. for him to have, because it sounds way more noble than he is.
Yes.
And it's probably thanks to Helga that he got such a beautiful name. I believe it means the protector, so you can make the connections in that way.
Yes.
And while we're at it, we can also mention that his family name, Ehrenburg, is pretty generic, but from what I understand, it's actually Jewish. Most of the people I have found on Google are Jewish with this family name, which is yet another reason he may have wished to purge his own blood from the impurities, as he's also one of the most prominent examples of an actual
Racist.
Yes,
Racist.
racist.
Yes. Now it's also worth noting that Wilhelm, despite his misanthropy and his and being so brutish and his desire to be a vampire and all that, actually does stand on ceremony and does see himself as a knight, as his aria goes to show. Because
yeah,
while
we
a lot
didn't
of
really mention, but the Rosen Cavalier is translated as the Knight of the Rose.
Yes. So while a lot of the LDO members don't really care much for the organization itself, they're out of awe and desire to receive Reinhardt's blessing, or out of fear for Reinhardt.
Yes.
Wilhelm does see everything that goes on there as a blessing, and he takes his knight gig very, very seriously, more so than his closest companion, Rusalka, does. Rusalka doesn't really care all that much for ceremony. And you even see it in his first fight with Red, where he tells him, state your name, that you know about manners on the battlefield.
Yes, which is actually his most cited quote, I believe.
Probably, yes.
Well, besides his Irae, maybe.
Yes. But yes, it's interesting because, like you said, he's kind of there's a bit of contradictions there, but I don't think it's a contradiction. It just goes to show that, like, people are more complicated than that.
Yeah, I suppose.
He's a little more complicated than that. He has his own he does have a sense of a sense of aesthetics, shall we say. And you can actually see it, like one of his famous shots in Interview with Kazakal Bey, where he's just reclining on the bar about to tell this reporter his story.
Which
actually
is going to be in our thumbnail, so you can probably see it right now.
Yes. So he's just reclining there, and he's like dressed savvily, like, he's not dressed in uniform, he's dressed savvily, like relaxed, almost like since Interview with Kazakal Bey takes place either in the 90s or immediately before Dies Irae does. So he's dressed in the spirit of the time, which is, noteworthy.
Yeah, because someone like Schreiber probably wouldn't care at all about it, but he has to live among these people, so he does try to get some fun out of it. Which is kind of related to his character development in the Interview with Kazakal Bey.
Yes.
Basically this contradiction lies within most members of the LDO, because they have this role they are given, but they are not actually defined by it. They want to get out of it, but they cannot, because for knowledge. In Wilhelm's case, he does try to be something more than brute, but it just doesn't work for him most of the time.
Yeah, I feel like there's like a scene towards the end of Interview with Kazakal Bey where, you could kind of say Wilhelm takes the center stage after everyone gets where the other LDO members kind of get sidelined. They kind of get completely beaten by a certain enemy, and you see Wilhelm and Reinhardt saying, "Okay, let's leave the two brutes to fight it out and leave them alone." But there was something, but when you actually go to the fight itself, there's almost something like, it's described as like the essence of all battles ever fought. Two men fighting over a woman. Like, the essence of all literature is war and love, and you have it like
Yeah, which is
encapsulated
also
here in a microcosm.
yes, which is also referenced in Dies Irae proper.
Yes. So it's actually interesting how he does kind of get treated, like within among the LDO members, he does kind of get treated as the combat nut who's a brute and doesn't like don't pay him any mind. He's
Yes, he's a
he's
simple
in,
man.
he's a simple man. He's insane. Don't take anything he says to heart. And you can actually see it like and you can see it like with his relationship with Beatrice, where he's like, "Yeah, what's up, runt? You're like, you're still a good woman, are you?" And she's like, "Go away, you're evil."
Yes.
It's actually really interesting.
I can, I suppose I can mention it right now that Wilhelm's seat in the LDO is of the Cancer, uh, the zodiac sign, which is characterized by its intuition and its constant uh, desire to communicate with others, even if they make the impression of pretty lonesome people, but they do require a helping hand or support from their colleagues, from their rivals, from their loved ones, and Wilhelm does actually fit that description pretty well.
yes,
And I suppose before getting into the meat of his story, we can mention the rest of small symbols that are written into him. So, uh, all LDO members get not only the numbers at the round table. We could have discussed the meanings of the numbers themselves, but numerology is a very, very vague science, so I don't think it has any merit behind it. So they all also get the zodiac sign attributed to them, which we have mentioned. They also get a rune from the Elder Futhark. In Wilhelm's case, it is Turisaz, which is basically can be translated as giants. So it symbolizes brute strength, it symbolizes forces of nature, it symbolizes male power, and everything along those lines. So it's actually pretty similar to Reinhardt's rune, Hagal, which is also described in the series proper, including the anime. Uh, and it's also symbolizes a thorn, so like on a rose. And he also gets a tarot card. In Wilhelm's case, it is a chariot. If you are familiar with the Shin Megami Tensei series, you probably know what the chariot symbolizes, but it's basically well the same thing. It's martial prowess, it's conquest, it's victory, it's overcoming opposition, and overall confidence in your own physical strength, as opposed to mental strength, which is symbolized by the card strength, which also actually belongs to Beatrice and Kay. So you can already draw some parallels uh, in that
yes.
regard. Mm, so, and before we go on, there is also another thing we can discuss, is that some LDO members are actually inspired by actual historical personages. Uh,
Most of them.
well, uh, Yeah, I suppose. So, it's pretty obvious in Reinhardt's case, it's pretty obvious in Trifa's case, but in Wilhelm's case it's a bit less apparent. Uh, there are some uh, theories drawn about it, but the main one is that uh, his character is drawn partially from Fritz Haarmann, who was a German serial killer in the beginning of the 20th century. He was known as the Butcher of Hanover uh, and the Vampire of Hanover. And it is worth noting that Wilhelm was actually born in Hanover. He did a lot of various atrocities and was sentenced to death. And before dying, he said something along the lines of "I can die, vampires are immortal," which is something you can see Wilhelm saying.
That said, while it was inspired by him, uh, while he was indeed inspired by Fritz Harman did exist in the Dies Irae
Yes,
universe.
yes. Both
He
him
actually,
and
he actually,
Schreiber's inspirations are mentioned in the bar scene at the
yes,
very end of the railroad. So it's not as clear cut as Reinhardt
yeah,
or
as Reinhardt
Machina.
or Salka, yeah.
Yeah. So the main point here is that post World War One Germany was a pretty gruesome place,
Yeah, and
and
that's
it
actually, and
made
that's
its fair
actually,
share of monsters.
yeah, and that's actually a point that's kind of worth mentioning about both Schreiber and about both Wilhelm and Schreiber. That they're both basically the product of post World War One Germany. Like that's the environment that birthed and raised them, an environment of decadence, of crime, of prostitution, of abuse, of a lot of frustration. Um, that's the environment that ended up giving birth to the Nazi war machine and also to these
To the cogs of it, so to say.
not even the cogs of it. These honestly despicable human beings.
Yes.
Of course, though of course it's not their fault in a way, but it's not their fault that they were born into this society. But it doesn't absolve them of all the crimes they did.
Yes, of course. We did mention it last time while discussing Schreiber.
Yeah.
Okay, so that about does it for the background of Wilhelm, and we can move on to his actual deeds in the story. And
Mm-hmm.
while we can just retell them all, what we want to do here first and foremost is to figure out uh, the main point of Wilhelm being in the story, so to say. Let's start with the Kasumi route, which actually I'm a bit blurry on because it's been a while since I last read it. But anyway, so Wilhelm during the common route he encounters Ren, he encounters Shiro, he recognizes Shiro's worth as a fighter, and then he basically does a whole lot of nothing until he and Shiro fight on top of the church, where he is struck through his chest with a huge cross and dies.
It's actually not quite that simple.
Oh,
He gets struck through the chest, but also the church's roof collapses and all the flames from inside because Red was fighting Kay in the church at the top, inside the church,
yeah,
inside the
yeah,
chapel,
right, right.
inside the chapel. So all the flames come out and also roast him. which is something that Shiro. It ends up being like Shiro. Shiro basically ended up making it so he gets impaled on the cross just as the flames come out, all with his for knowledge mode, and that ends up actually doing the deed, killing Wilhelm, and opening the church's swastika in the process.
Yes.
But yes, and Shiro, of course, has his very famous quote there.
Yes.
Drop that vampy, sing Zig Heil in Hell. I'm not sure how they localized it, but yes, it's very
Well,
strong
there
scene.
isn't much Japanese here really to
Yeah.
translate.
Yeah. But yes, it was actually one of Wilhelm's more impressive fights overall.
Yes, actually, the overall theme of Wilhelm is that he is denied what he wants, and he actually did get a pretty decent fight here.
Yes. So yes, that was a very decent, very cool fight, and one of his more impressive performances in the visual novel, compared to how he gets shafted in the two following routes.
Yeah, alright, so uh, that's basically it for the Kasumi route. In the K route, he, we proceed after the common route where he meets Ren and Shiro basically. Then he goes on to, I believe he does go on to open the swastika at the school, where he basically uses this opportunity to kill Kay because she irritates him to no end, because she's uh, everything that uh, he doesn't like in his women.
She's in direct opposition to his sense of aesthetics, shall we say?
Yes, which is yet another way he's so similar to Eleanor, as we have discussed last time. So, despite the fact that Kay's Bria is actually pretty effective against him, his sheer experience and amount of soul is still more than enough to put her to make her go on the defensive, and as she is about to be defeated by him, Trifa basically strikes him dead with his own
No,
Bria. No?
no, it's a little different. Triffa shows up, and then Schreiber shows up inside of his Bria, and that upsets the balance inside the Bria
Oh,
because he has two extremely powerful Bria souls inside of his
well,
inside of his.
actually, also Machina appears, I believe.
Yes, basically a lot of powerful souls appear that upsets him. Schreiber's appearance distracts him, and that allows Kay to cut off his head, and that opens the Bria, if I remember correctly.
Okay, I do remember that Kay cut off Rusalka's head in the Kasumi route, but
No, she impaled him for the chest.
oh, okay. Well, either way, he dies before he manages to uh,
Kill Kay.
kill Kay, do what he wants, uh, and that's something he has been used to, actually. Anyway,
Kind of.
we move on to the Mario route, which we have discussed over the last few podcasts because it was adapted in the anime. But anyways, uh, he Shiro gets killed by Rusalka while opening the bottomless pit swastika. That irritates him greatly. He goes along. He goes ahead and confronts Rusalka in the church, which is when Shiro re
Resurfaces.
resurfaces, emerges, so to say, and he actually gets a proper Bria on Bria fight against him, but not before Schreiber appears yet again, and in the visual novel he does get pierced by a cross from the church's rooftop, and in the anime he is just chomped.
By the skeleton, yes.
Yes, and thus opening the church swastika. And again, we see the idea of him almost doing what he wants, but not quite succeeding.
It's not so much that it's quite succeeding. He gets cheated out of it in a way.
Yes, basically. And lastly, of the four common routes, we get to the rear route, which is a bit more eventful for him, so to say. So, after the common route, he goes ahead and opens the bottomless pit swastika by himself. And along the way, he devours Ellie, he devours Shiro, he devours Kasumi, and they stay within his soul reserves until basically the end. Then he is attracted by Kei and Ren, who are fighting in the amusement park, because Ren wants to make sure his friends are alive, and the best way to do so is to confront Wilhelm himself, who has opened the swastika of the bottomless pit. So Kei gives him the idea of just duking it out, and because Wilhelm is so combat crazy, he is bound to appear sooner or later. And that's basically the best way to confront him, because he's good at hiding. And so he does appear, and kills Kei as he wanted to do in her own route.
He doesn't exactly kill her, he helps in her being eliminated.
Yeah, basically. So the reasons are still the same. He's very mad about her taking Beatrice's place, because Beatrice was much better than this silly yellow-faced brat. And after that, he is, I believe, he is lifted to Gladheim with the rest. Was he?
I think he is, but he doesn't. Actually, I'm not sure he was. I think the only ones who got lifted were the ones that actually wanted to rebel.
Yeah. So he got a ride, so to say, but he wasn't really doing anything in the Gladheim itself. But he does have a small scene with Ren, who is still trying to come to terms with the death of his friend, and he is basically trying to push his own worldview on him. So, like, Ren gets visions of Wilhelm in his childhood, and he tells him about this entire concept of the roles, like
of karma.
Yes, of karma. The connection between Wilhelm and Rose is actually pretty difficult, I would say, because there's nothing in his craving in and of itself that implies this connection. It's just that vampires are often associated with roses because, like, red, blood, thorns, and so on. But his own point of view is basically so. Imagine that these countless roses are keys, and you have to find the right one, and even while doing so, you have to tear your own hands to shreds by
touching them.
Yes, by touching them. And after that, well, Ren goes a bit crazy, but we're not talking about that here. We're talking about Wilhelm. So he gets to talk with Reinhardt, and asks for the last chance to become the commander. So he just goes ahead and asks Reinhardt to for permission to fight Schreiber for the title of Albedo. And Reinhardt does give his permission, and Schreiber and Wilhelm have the fight of their lives, basically. But somewhere along the way, Wilhelm realizes that he can't actually win as he is, so he gets a bit of a helping hand from Shiro within him. So by that point, the souls of Ellie, Shiro and Kasumi have reached the core of Wilhelm's soul, so to say, and meet Helga, so he's on an airbase. And by provoking her, they basically ramp up the Annenerbe's output. And by doing so, not only do they help Wilhelm get in the upper hand over Schreiber, they also weaken his control over his relic and over the souls in his possession. And thanks to that, Shiro actually manages to emerge just at the very...
Well, it's not so much. It's also that, and it's also that Wilhelm kind of allowed him to do it to get the win on Schreiber.
Yes, of course, because he is a soul in his possession, and he can use all of them. And it all ends when Schreiber goes in to deal the finishing blow, but just before that, Shiro's hand emerges from Wilhelm, and they both shout "Victory is mine" and shoot Schreiber. This is actually where Wilhelm perishes, but despite the fact that Schreiber actually survives this fight, he does not know that. He lives with complete with fully believing that he has won finally, and even if he did die, he finally got what he wanted.
Little does he know.
Yeah, so Schreiber does survive, but in the end Schreiber is also defeated because he spent so many souls and so much time fighting Wilhelm, so it actually works out for him in the end, I suppose. That's it for the route itself, but we also have a short snippet of Wilhelm in the New World, which is nothing major, but we see him with his younger sister, basically being good siblings with each other, which is not something you can say about Wilhelm, really.
Well, not exactly good siblings, but he does kind of, does kind of end up, shall we say, tolerating her in a way.
Yeah, basically.
He doesn't rape and kill her as opposed to...
Yeah, that's good enough. And that was it for Wilhelm's involvement in the series proper. And so a lot of people are kinda down on Wilhelm because really what he does is just fight, and that's basically it. And
yeah.
Not so how should I put it? His popularity, despite all that, is kinda curious. to a lot of people, especially because at the time there were no various spin-offs, there were no sequels and so on. So all we have to go on is the roots, and that's it. So I suppose I can ask what would have changed without Wilhelm in the story?
What would have changed without Wilhelm? Well, for starters, he's a good exposition tool. He like has this role.
Yes. So
Um,
he's basically a mid boss, as I mentioned.
yes.
Like his simple desire to fight is actually coincides with the overall goal of the LDO of opening swastikas. So by simply saying, so there's Wilhelm, so Ren has to do something.
Yeah,
The
it's
plot
it's worth noting
goes
that
forward.
like his first encounter with Ren was extremely traumatizing for that reason because like if you're not careful, I'm gonna wipe your city off the map. I'm gonna destroy your life. I'm like you better take this seriously or it's night, kid. So
Yeah.
yeah, so there's that. He also kind of serves. He also kind of serves as a good foil to other characters, mainly Shiro. His relationship with Shiro is actually extremely interesting. He's actually this like he has his relationship with Shiro is like Shiro's second strongest relationship after Ren. Interestingly enough, within the
Yeah.
scope of the visual novel, like of
Even
course you have
Ellie is not as close to him, I would say.
well, no, she's closer, but they don't get as much attention, shall we say, as
Yes, I suppose.
um. So yes, but the thing is, and this is something that's actually relevant going forward, is that out of everyone, despite you learning so much about him and his past and his motivations, um, Willem is a pretty static character in Dies Irae because in the end, like in the bar scene, you see how a lot of the core cast members, like you see like Rusalka and Beatrice and Triffa and Lisa and Eleanor and Lotus himself and even Reinhardt in a way. All of these characters kind of end up like speaking of what they learned in the process of how their origins and cravings are the same, but their outlook on how to achieve them are entirely different and more optimistic and looking towards tomorrow. Wilhelm doesn't get that, and Wilhelm is mentioned as later on as simply being executed by Reinhardt, like his historical influence was.
Yeah.
So he doesn't actually develop. Like you can see that, like in the new world with Mari, he gets reincarnated, and his relationship with Elga is not exactly changed, but is a little less distorted, and he's basically now kind of the doting big brother in a way.
Yes.
But like you don't see a whole lot of change in his core character, which is what Interview with Kazuko Bay and Kajiri Kamui Kagura end up doing in a way.
Yes. So I actually do think that a lot of his popularity had to come from both his voice actor and from his overall theme. Like people love vampires, and that's why they love Wilhelm.
Yes.
And I guess he did have a lot of screen time, so we get a lot of cool scenes with him. We get a lot of cool dialogue. We get quite a good look of his uh, philosophy, so to say, and that all made it such that he is the one who got a proper spin-off of the whole cast. So I suppose we can talk a bit about interview with Kazuku Bay. Again, without many spoilers, but basically Wilhelm gives an interview which is supposed to tell what made him who he is right now. And along the way, we learn about his uh, relationship with Claudia. We learn about his relationships with the rest of the LDO members, and we learn about what character development he went through between De Morgan Demerong and proper Dies Irae. And in a few words, Wilhelm is already a member of the LDO, but he feels like he still has a ways to go, like he still isn't the strongest he can be, because
There's like he can amass as many souls, but there's like an upper limit that
yes,
he hasn't broken yet.
there is
Once he will break
always a
it,
limit, and he figured that uh, there are two ways to become stronger. It is either through quantity of souls, but unlike, say, Schreiber, he is not as discriminate. Uh, Schreiber is described as
oh no, he's very indiscriminate.
yes, he is basically described as a junk food eater. Like he just eats everything.
No. Wilhelm is very indiscriminate. It's like in the back of his mind that like quality beats quantity, but the starting one of the starting scenes is him sacking Warsaw,
Yes,
and it's a very infamous incident for him because he killed everyone, his own brigade included.
yes,
Basically, no one was left alive. So he was very indiscriminate and didn't mind consuming. He did try to like break through that limit for consumption of souls, but in the process, he ended up meeting Claudia. He ended up
yes,
accidentally saving her from debris, and Claudia, who is an angel who believes in the not an actual angel, but a very angelic kind of person who
yes.
believes in the good of others, innocently assumes that he basically saved her.
Well, I mean, he's a German soldier.
Yes.
He's an ally.
Yes. So he basically decides that and he also kind of finds himself relating to her because, like him, she's albino, which is also why she's covered in bandages. If you ever see images of Claudia, she's always in bandages because that's all burns from exposure to the
Yes,
sun.
and unlike Wilhelm, she does not stay indoors during the
Yes,
day.
she goes out into the sun even at the risk of her own life because she's an outgoing, optimistic person, and she wishes, even though she knows it might kill her, she also knows that she's not going to live very long because of her physical condition, and
Yes,
instead of trying to prolong it, but to isolate herself to prolong it, she chooses to go outside and live to her live life to its finest
yes,
while she can. So yes, Willem kind of feels an affinity for her, and he also senses that her soul is actually powerful. He actually sees that her as his chance to break through that limit. He wishes to consume her soul.
yes.
Like
Going back, there is the problem of quantity, but there is also the problem of quality of souls, because in Reinhardt's case, his souls are both numerous and powerful, because he supports them by his charisma. So he figured that he should follow that route. If he just can't break through the limit of quantity, he should try and improve the quality of souls he devours. And he thinks that by communicating with Claudia and devouring her when the time is right, he is going to uh, understand the secret behind it all. So, a lot of things happen along the way, and well, I suppose you can say he does learn uh, how he's supposed to improve the quality of himself and so
Well, I
forth.
think it wouldn't be a huge spoiler to say that Interview with Kazuko Bay being the
Prequel to
prequel
this.
being the prequel that it is, and Wilhelm being the character that he is, that his relationship with Claudia doesn't quite turn out the way either he or we would like it to go out. It doesn't, like, the love doesn't fully come to fruition, and he doesn't quite get his wish because, as always, the things he wants always slip between his fingers,
Yes,
are
yes.
always rubbed away from him. But either way, his relationship with Claudia ends up being kind of a turning point in his life because, as I've said earlier, she's his first love, and he kind of describes his first years in the LDO before meeting Claudia as kind of he was still an adolescent at the time, and through learning that relationship, he had to, for the first time, become kind of an adult, kind of a man. In a way,
Yes,
his
yes.
relationship with Claudia made him a man. Um, Even though the relationship was it was never consummated, shall we say. They never
It's
slept.
not healthy either, really.
Well, whether it's healthy or not, because by that point, Claudia would probably not be able to take it.
Yeah.
But regardless, there was definitely, I mean, it was a surprise in general because for everyone involved, because Beatrice, obviously being the good girl that she is, likes Claudia a lot because Claudia is a good person. She's a sweet person, and basically she saw Wilhelm's relationship with Claudia she saw Wilhelm very suspiciously there because and Wilhelm didn't actually say anything to
Yes.
deny her fears because he basically
Well, I
said,
mean, he does admit that he's going to devour her.
at some point, yes.
Kurauda, Kuraudia.
Yes. So, god damn it, Swall. But, but it's kind of odd in general that Wilhelm would treat anyone in that manner because he's a very egotistical person. He's a very megalomaniacal person, even.
Yes, yes.
So him showing any kind of affection, and he does end up showing actual affection, genuine affection and concern for Claudia over the course of their story. That it's actually really really interesting. So it doesn't become just a chapter of his life where there was a woman he was in love with and then he lost her. No, it becomes an actual moment of his maturing and of understanding, because it's also a moment where his wish to be a vampire kind of matures from kind of a desperate, insane delusion to an actual craving of, I always want to survive. I don't want anyone to ever defeat me, to ever look down on me, to ever step on me. The only
Yes,
person
yes.
ever allowed to be above me is Reinhard. And even on the day when Reinhard would disappear, I will still remain in the world, which ends up being more true than he probably anticipated.
Yes,
Um,
I suppose.
and it's like, it's not that he ever, like, obviously it being a prequel, he doesn't learn a lesson that he didn't have in Dies Irae yet. It's not like he kind of grows out or
Yeah, so it wasn't
sublimates.
retconned or anything.
Yeah, yeah. It's not like his craving gets sublimated to anything more noble or optimistic than it was, like it was with the other characters in the bar scene. But it did kind of show his wish kind of maturing compared to what it was in 1939, with the real character development actually coming around in Kajiri.
Yes.
Um, but yes, it was a really good story, and Willem also has, like, I think a big deal of Willem's appeal is that despite him being so strong, he's almost always actually the underdog in the big fights.
Yes.
And that's part of why Shiro's fight with him was so good and unique in Kasumi's route, because this is actually a situation where he's not the underdog, but he gets but like he actually ends up fighting Shiro as an equal. But yes, here also he kind of gets shown as the underdog because you can see that like most of the LDO members don't treat him as well. It's like they kind of end up ending out with him because like he kind of settled down with Claudia at some point, and he's kicking back, relaxing. So the other characters kind of like to show up and kind of crash at his place,
They
much to
mostly
his.
care about her than him.
Yes, they mostly care about her and basically looking at him as keeping an eye on him because one, it's very concerning, and two, it's very amusing. But yes, nobody really takes him all that seriously. But like, this is actually where he actually gets the most spotlight, where he actually ends up kind of saving the day, and he's where he actually gets to function as the villain protagonist. And it's an interesting kind of look into his character. And if you like Wilhelm, then like obviously Interview with Kazuko Bay is something you need to check out. And who knows, hopefully in the future it'll be translated into English.
Yes. Really not much to say here, I guess. And the last point of his development actually happens in Kajiri Kamui Kagura. It's probably not a spoiler at this point that Kajiri is a direct sequel of Dies Irae, and Wilhelm, just as many other characters, is reincarnated as another person.
And he's actually by the name. Let me finish it by the name of Keishiro. But let me just note that the moment you start Kajiri Kamui Kagura, you actually hear a remix of his theme of Rose Vamp, which is like the biggest clue in if you ever imagine people back in 2011 popping Kajiri Kamui Kagura into their hard drives.
I think it was also in the demo.
Or like reading the demo, and they have no idea what this game is except that Masato wrote it, and the first thing they see is a Japanese mix of Rose and Vamp, and a character that looks a lot like Wilhelm, voiced by Taniyama Kisho, screeching in a vulgar manner.
And fighting with spikes.
Yes. So, he's a pretty big clue in case anyone didn't know what they're going into.
Yes. Although Light themselves didn't really announce it as such.
It's actually kind of mixed because originally they didn't publicate it as such, but the PVs kind of made it terribly clear.
Yeah. You have the Yatsuka Hagi trailer, which has Einsatz remix in the background, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So you quickly understand that the references are not simply
coincidental. Yes. Though I went into it and like at first I wasn't quite sure. I felt like maybe he's just kind of a dead ringer because I was like mildly aware that there's like Judas in Paradise Lost and he looks a lot like Shiro. It's a character, but they're not exactly as related as you think. It's not like Judas is Shiro or like the Paradise Lost version of Shiro, but he's kind of his own character, even if there is some kind of relation. I didn't know at the time. I haven't I was fairly new to most of this stuff at the time, so I figured like, okay, just because there's a character that looks like a Dies Irae character and is voiced by the same voice actor, that doesn't say much because it's
basically it. Yeah.
But eventually, when you hear the same theme, you kind of okay. The other character worth mentioning, Kajiri Kamui Kagura, is another one of the eight protagonists of Kajiri Kamui Kagura, and Keishiro's little sister called Sakuya, who is an interesting character, who is a charming character in and of itself. She's a lot more of a character. She's an obvious reference to Helga.
Yes.
And some fan theories have since also added that she's probably a mix of Helga and Claudia.
But she is voiced by Helga.
but she is voiced by Helga's very talented voice actress.
Yes.
And while Helga made quite an impression with her voice in Dies Irae, she has nothing on Sakuya and Kochuri Kamui Kagura, who is amazingly voiced, and let's just say the words Anisama have never been more erotic. But yes, in the words of another Kochuri Kamui Kagura character in the Valentine video, Imoto Banzai. But yes, she's his little sister, and there's actually some unique circumstances surrounding the two Kyogetsu siblings. That's their last name, Kyogetsu. And they're actually from what is called the Kyogetsu clan. Now, in Kochuri Kamui Kagura, there's like most of the supernatural powers stem from something called yugami, or distortion, or I've never thought of the clear-cut localization of it. But something like distortion or curse.
Yes.
There's basically people in Shinshu some people in Shinshu are cursed because of the first invasion to the lands of the Yatsukahagi to the east, and they carry that curse in their veins, and it both makes them carriers of disasters. They bring bad luck and disasters and natural calamities, and it also gives them all sorts of superpowers and cool abilities. Now, the Kyogetsu clan is has an especially strong curse running through their veins. They're actually the strongest. They have the strongest recorded curse factor in all of Shinshu. And as a result, they're isolated. They're basically exiled, isolated, and they're not allowed contact with the rest of Shinshu, except for one occasion, which is every year or every few years. They're required to make a trip to the capital, Hosuma, and have their curse factor measured by the Onmyoji, by the shall we say the priests, the spellcasters of the capital, which is actually what happens. Which is actually how Kochuri Kamui Kagura starts. That's how the characters gather, because there's this gathering where they're supposed to have their curse factor measured.
Oh, there's also the whole tournament thing.
But yeah, there's a lot going on at the start. The start is actually kind of confusing, but basically, the Kyogetsu siblings come to the capital to have their curse factor measured, and Sakuya actually bears the distinction of having the highest curse factor in all of Shinshu, to the point where she is called the calamity-bearing princess, where if she were to ever actually use her power and attempt to unleash her distortion, her curse, it is said that a great unpreceded calamity would befall Shinshu, which you do kind of get a glimpse of later on.
Yeah.
But yes, she is basically a sheltered princess. She is extremely beautiful, just like her brother Keishiro. She has silvery hair. And this actually I feel like this kind of conceptualizes their incestuous relationship, because them being of the same clan kind of forces them into inbreeding.
Which
because
is also isolated from the rest of the
yes, it's isolated from the world. You can't actually join the clan. So basically they're forced into inbreeding, because otherwise they will simply die out.
And that's also why their blood bonds are so important.
Yes. So, unlike Wilhelm's relationship with Helga, which is, I feel like Interview with Kazuko, the beginning of Interview with Kazuko Bay kind of sums it up, with her where you see Helga inside Wilhelm's soul, like doting over, oh, you're such a beautiful, gifted son. Oh, I love you so much, and then basically telling her, shut up, you literal whore. Which is, that's not how one would usually speak to his mother, to say the least. With Keishiro and Sakuya, Keishiro is actually very protective and very devoted to Sakuya.
Which is actually very unusual for the world of Shinshu.
Yes, Yes, as we've said, the world of in previous episodes of the podcast, the world of Shincha is actually very plagued with selfishness and taking advantage of others. So for Keishiro to be as protective and loving of his sister is a bit unusual, but you know that's how it goes. And
Yeah,
he basically
it's actually mentioned that his egoism is still seen in that. Uh, there is a scene where he basically says, "I won't allow anyone to lay a hand on my woman because what would that mean for me or something like that." So he says "me" 4 times in a single sentence while describing
yes.
uh, his relationship with Sakuya.
Yes, but it's also there's like when Rindo makes her big speech at the beginning of the game where she talks about bonds and companionship and camaraderie, and now it's a very important value, and they need it if they are to they need to work together if they're to conquer the threat to the east. Keishira is also one of the characters to basically flip her off and tell her. Bonds? What are you talking about? What's bonds? Is it something? What is some kind of food? You heat it? What are you talking about? Stop talking out your ass. So yes, he's still like he's still good old. He still has some of the good old Bay in him, and sense that he doesn't seem to really give a shit about whatever about
Yep.
other people.
Yep.
But there is that point of his relationship with Sakuya, which is still not exactly what you'd expect. And his big motivation to joining the expedition to the east is to basically go east, defeat the demons, and basically cleanse his clan of the curse.
Yes.
And specifically Sakuya as well, because Sakuya is the most afflicted by it.
Yes. And overall, this entire comparison of Wilhelm and Keishiro is going on along the entire story of Kajiri Kamikagure. So on one hand,
Yes.
you do have Wilhelm's character. You have many references to what he was before. So even if you haven't read Dies Irae for some weird reason, you still get the complete picture, basically. But on the other hand, you have Keishiro and his desire to help his sister, despite the fact that his literal karma goes against that wish. And
It's worth noting that Sakuya herself is actually ecstatic about the idea of her brother consuming her for the sake of growing stronger. It's actually kind of a plot thread across his scenes in the
yes,
in the game that if you were to tap into his past life, he would actually gain a power equal to that of the Tenmas, of the demons he's facing, but that would kill Sakuya. And Sakuya is perfectly fine with that. She's ecstatic with the idea of dying for her brother. Their entire arc is actually called the Kisenka arc. Kisenka being the flower of blood, as it's called. So Sakuya always tells him, "Let me become your Kisenka, your flower of blood, your bloody flower." But Keishiro constantly has to hold back the urge to do so.
yes. And we probably won't spoil how that goes, but
And yeah,
yeah, but basically, uh, it is a good uh, ending
it's
of Wilhelm's development over all the games.
yeah, yes. It basically kind of ends with the victory of selflessness over selfishness in a way.
Yeah, basically.
Yes, and going into any more of that would be spoilers. But let's just say that everything that a lot of the things that ended up making Wilhelm who he is kind of end up being flipped under her head and, shall we say, sublimated into a better overall person.
Yes. And that's about it for Wilhelm as a character and his story across all the games. There is still Dies Irae on the horizon, and who knows what that will bring to him, but we will talk about that when it comes. But until then, we also have some questions to answer. You are still great listeners. You provide us with many questions which we can discuss, and well, some of them we did touch upon already. But anyways, so the first batch of questions comes from a contractor who writes us for the second time in a row. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So the first question is: do you think that Wilhelm stands out as a bloodlusting, sociopathic character compared to others with similar traits? If yes, what is it that makes him special?
Well, I think he gets enough background and character development that kind of sets him apart. Not to mention his huge development in Kajiri Kamui Kagura, which we sadly can't exactly go into because it would be very spoilery. But it's basically over the course of the series, he has a lot of character groups that kind of sets him apart. But if you just want to isolate Dies Irae, I think it's kind of like I said, the way he stands in ceremony compared to his bloodlust, his overly developed background, like the things you see in Railroad, which kind of conceptualize his character, not conceptualize, contextualize his character.
Yes.
His voice acting being as good as it is, his design being as good as it is, and he gets a lot of screen time. So yes.
I would also mention that it's not who he is or what his role is, but how he is written. So by going so much deeper into his character than most other writers do, Masada does make him a much better character, even if it can really be summed up as just a bloodthirsty psychopath. Alright, next question is, what do you think is his role in the story besides being just an antagonist? Well, we kinda covered that already.
Is it representing a concept or idea in your eyes? What do you think about his interactions with other characters, and which are your favorite? Well, does he represent a concept or an idea? He does represent like a big theme that appears in Interview with Kazuko Bay, is the idea of a metosala. The metosala being a biblical character of the oldest person to ever live. A person that has supposedly lived for 1,000 years and more. And that's kind of his theme, the theme of being a metosala, the theme of desiring to live forever, to outlive everyone, to always survive. And you can see it in every bit of his character, from his childhood where he struggled to survive, to kind of his story and Interview with Kazuko Bay, and how it doesn't exactly work out for him. But it still is craving in a way, and the fact it doesn't work out for him isn't exactly his fault. It's we all know whose fault is that. But yeah, I feel like that's the concept that he gives. And there's also for like a sociopath, a bloodlusted sociopath, there's a lot of romanticism to his character. His kind of chivalrous part, him being like the Rose Knight, his relationship with Claudia, his relationship kind of with Helga, his desire to act
with Sakuya.
Yes, and of course with Sakuya later on. There's definitely a lot of appealing ideas in his character.
Yes.
And about his interactions with other characters, and which are my favorite. I think we've kind of covered them all in our discussion earlier. There's like his relationship with Chiro, which is, everybody loves that. Everybody loves the sexual tension, and you can see it a lot in the promotional material, because you always see them
there is little sexual tension between him and the women.
Yes. Well, except for Claudia and Helga, of course.
Well, I don't know. It's still a
Uh,
bit more innocent.
I wouldn't say. I actually wouldn't say that it's innocent with either of them. There are like there's obvious breaking points in sexual tension with with both of them. But well, regardless, you can actually see like what I was going to say is that you can actually see in a lot of the promotional materials, a lot of the arts and the tapestries. You actually see him and Cher kind of butting up. They're always like, they're elbowing each other. They're like, we've got their arms thrown over each other. They're like buddies.
Yeah, yeah.
So there's the obvious sexual tension between those two. His relationship with Beatrice is kind of nice because, like
Yes.
I said, he basically sees her as like as one of the group, as like
Well, considering
as
how this very relationship drives him for half of the routes, it should be
yes,
good.
yes, it's good. He like sees her as like he sees her as a kid. He actually calls her a kid in the entirety of Interview with Kazuko Bay, which he actually doesn't in Dies Irae. Actually, apparently, kind of the relationship actually kind of grew out of it, and you've got to keep into consideration that Kay actually, excuse me, Beatrice is actually there for the majority of his life.
Yeah.
He's known her for a long time. Like Beatrice dies in 1995, and that's just 11 years out of the 80, 90 years that Wilhelm has lived by then. That's quite a lot. So he's known her for the majority of his life, and
Actually, this reminds me that there was also the Rusalka novel. Did Wilhelm
uh,
have any role in that?
he actually didn't. He was actually is it actually takes place in his turf. It actually takes place in America, which is his turf. That's where he usually spends his time and after the war. But at the time, he was actually away in Vietnam.
All right.
He was away at Vietnam, and meanwhile, Rusalka and Beatrice were doing their investigation in uh, in
Yeah.
uh, I think it was in New York. Though maybe I'm remembering wrong. But either way, he doesn't actually have a role, though he is mentioned.
Yeah.
Um,
So there is Beatrice. There is Ray, I suppose.
yes,
Who?
there's Ray, which we don't know a lot about them, and their relationship is actually not as deep as fans thought it is, because apparently he met Ray exactly once, and it didn't go any deeper than that. But basically, he basically met Ray during Vietnam. Ray was basically after Musashi died and Glazen disappeared. Ray was apparently the next heir of the Tobolkain role, but
Yes.
she was at the time. But at the time, she refused to use the relic because once she would, the, that's the end for her.
Yeah. Yeah.
And she was basically instead of trying to live a normal life and suppressing that and suppressing, shall we say, her family legacy, she actually decided to throw herself into combat and kind
And
of
die on her own terms.
and die on her own terms. Yes, and she was actually blessed with supernatural abilities because apparently being born to an Ewikite user actually makes you very conductive to having supernatural abilities in general.
Yeah.
So she was actually a very strong soldier and character, and she basically met Wilhelm in Vietnam while he was killing soldiers for fun and recreation, shall we say, and
Yep.
engaged them in battle. Now that battle was actually really interesting because despite her not having an Ewokite proper at the time, she'd actually forced Wilhelm into the defensive and actually made him use his Bria. And at that point, which is unusual, you don't usually, because Bria, it's worth mentioning because Brias get thrown all the time in the Assyria, and it generally doesn't get shown in the main game. But basically, since souls are fuel, using your powers too much actually consumes those souls, and it's actually possible to run out. So usually, Ewikite users don't actually use their Briaz all that often.
Yeah, why
Especially
bother?
especially Wilhelm, because his Bria is actually really taxing, because it's as you
And
said,
difficult to control.
and difficult to control, so it actually consumes a lot of souls. Um, but yes, he actually ends up having to use it, which is unusual. The only other non-Ewikite user actually got him to do that was Shiro, and Shiro had foreknowledge on his side.
Yes.
And that basically forces Ray to use the Fevelsberg Longinus and succumb to becoming to Volkine. But it is noted as one of the times when because Wilhelm was obviously very excited by the fact that he had found an opponent this good, and her basically turning to Volkine and dying. Was another case where someone he was interested in slipped between his fingers. As a result of this relationship, which was very brief, Ray, Tubal-Cain II, and Wilhelm have actually gotten a lot of attention from the fans, and they actually ranked really high on the couple rating.
Yes.
To Masuda's surprise, because Ray hardly appears. How many of the things even know she exists? But you can see hints of it even in the game, because when he faces Kay in her route, he basically says, Valkyria, she was great. She was, she was a founding member. She was a pure Aryan. She was great. Tubal-Cain II, she was a good woman. She was strong. But you, who the hell are you? You're nothing. You're a kid.
Basically, yeah.
So yes, even later on, he ends up kind of praising Ray even after her death. So yes, that's another relationship that's really interesting. There's also Helga, of course, and Eleanor, as we mentioned, and Reinhard.
And Rusalka.
Yes, and Rusalka. Yes, Rusalka is actually someone that he knows for a very long time. She was actually one of his closest companions. They also have kind of similar views on things, similar views on how to treat other people in a way. They both have kind of this. They both see other people as prey to be devoured.
They do have vampiric Anenerbe.
Yes, it's another point worth mentioning that Rusalka's Battery Airsbet is actually, Elizabeth Bathory was considered the shall we say, Elizabeth Bathory's fictionalized character Carmilla was described as the daughter of Dracula, who is the fictional version of Vlad Tepes. So that's actually another interesting kind of relationship they have. There's quite a few. I know quite a few people who actually end up shipping Rusalka and Wilhelm, which I personally don't agree with. I don't see them like that, mostly because you have Wilhelm pretty much saying that he doesn't get off the woman like Rusalka. He says it quite clearly in the visual novel, but the facts don't really come into play when it comes to shipping, I guess. But everybody's free to ship whoever they want. But yes, that's another interesting relationship he has. And who's your favorite ship and why? If we're just talking Wilhelm, then Claudia, of course. And if we're talking like Wilhelm as a composite character across the entire series, Keishiro and Sakuya.
Yeah, I guess I'll have to agree, but I also don't dislike the ship of Wilhelm and Rusalka, if only because there is a nice dynamic between them, even if it's not romantic.
I think they're besties, personally.
Yeah.
I think that like Rusalka, Wilhelm, and Spinner, they're like the jolly gang, sort of. I think like one of my favorite scenes in general in Dies Irae is like in the beginning of the first side story of Beatrice's side story, where you basically see them like driving underway to Suahara, and you have Rusalka like screaming marching cadences, and Wilhelm kicking her, screaming, "Shut up, you stupid bitch!"
Yes.
It's like they have a fun dynamic for sure. Don't get me wrong, I'm not like. I have no problem with them as I could just don't think that they exactly work as a ship, as a romantic
Yeah,
relationship.
basically. Actually, this reminds me of another character who had a relationship with Wilhelm, even if it was one-sided. It is one of the characters of
Oh yes,
Verfallender Zegen, Jane
Chango,
Du. Yes.
Chango, yes.
So, she was yet another soldier in the Vietnam War, and Wilhelm murdered all of her companions, so she basically swore to kill him one day, and in some bizarre way, she also fell in love with him because of that. And
Obsessive compulsive behavior.
yeah, basically. And her interaction in the side story with Wilhelm comes down to her being killed by him finally, and her telling him that you should not cheat on women because God is a bit uh, particular about love,
Yeah,
which he is.
God doesn't like cheaters.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which is,
Uh,
I suppose, one way you can see Wilhelm. So he is denied everything he wants because he wants too much and just can't figure out what exactly he wants. And it's kinda what he comes down to in Kajirika Muikagura.
well, yeah, except he does end up kind of realizing what he wants in the end. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, of course, it's not really a ship, it's just some aspect of his story that we forgot to mention.
Yes.
Alright, so that's all for contractors questions, and we also got some questions from Shurado Shikoten.
Yes.
Uh, which is, I think, the first time he writes this. Alright, so,
No, I don't think it's the first time.
yeah,
I think
right,
it's the
so,
second.
his or her first question is, when looking at all the LDO tapestries, including the recent release of Shiro and Ally tapestry, would Kajiri Kagura have their own character tapestries for the Eastern Expedition, Yasuka Hagi, Hajun, and even the tapestry with all Hado gods in one peak?
No, I mean, I obviously I can't speak like general because who knows what'll happen. But I think that this ship has kind of sailed already, unless Kajiri Kamui Kagura ends up receiving like a really big shiny re-release. I don't think it'll happen
I
because there's
think
already
Paradise Lost getting one is more likely.
yes, because Paradise Lost needs one.
Yes.
Though I don't know. I don't know if they'll bother completely redrawing it. I also think. I also think it's for the best if they don't, because part of that raw art style. I mean, the art style is bad, but that raw art style does kind of fit in with the feel of the game, with that really raw, early 2000s, almost Dashin kind of level of feel. Kind of really contributes to Paradise Lost's feel. But there is actually Kajiri Kamui Kagura merch out there, actually.
Yes.
None of the boys, not so much of the boys, but there is like the tapestries of the girls and of the girls on both sides, actually, in a hot spring. You have basically the four girls of the Eastern Expedition in the spring, in a hot spring, and another one of the Yatsukahagi where you see Numahime, where you see you kind of see Moray in both of her incarnations, both of her human incarnations. You see Momiji and you see Tokoyo. So yes, there is some merch out there, which I think kind of lends credence to the fact that unless something big happens, they're not going to make any new tapestries, particularly for this. There's also another one, I think, of again of the girls of the Eastern Expedition girls in a bath, and you also have Yume there, who's another major character, and they're basically drinking. I see everybody getting drunk, along with Nico as well. Nico's also in the bath there.
Yes, because she's the best heroine.
Yes. So yes, I don't think there will be new. They'll make new ones. Though like all the Hado gods and Hajun and all that. That might happen because of Dies Irae Pantheon.
Yes, and we also already have some illustrations that fit a tapestry pretty well.
Yes, of course. The main visual is very conductive to that. So
and we also have God sitting on the throne.
Yes, so there's an entire possibility of there being a series of those tapestries coming out, like the LDO tapestries. Like, Light is very good at making merchandise. They very much like making up reasons to suck the fans' wallets dry. So I think you can definitely expect, based on past trends, that there will be Dies Irae Pantheon merchandise coming out. But that remains to be seen.
Yep. Basically that. Right, and the second question is, since you brought my attention about power levels and VS Battle Wiki, what is wrong about it in more detail? So,
Okay.
simply put, they do not check their sources. That's one thing. So, because
Yes.
of that, it is prone to various mistranslations. And the worst thing is that you can't really fix it, because to do to edit the various pages, you have to see what exactly they have been translating, and you can't really do it without any references on the page. And even if I were to, for example, go and edit like Yato's page on the wiki, it would require me to read basically the entire Kajiri Kamui Kagura from start to finish, looking up these particular details about his powers, which may have been mentioned in passing and aren't given much thought, except for when you actually care about power levels and this stuff.
Yeah, I think that there are two main problems with versus Battle Wiki. The first one is that there's no standard for information and sourcing, and no quality checking.
Yes.
Basically, if you go into Wikipedia is actually a lot better, even though it's not ideal. Wikipedia itself is actually a lot better in this, because it actually does require you to give sources, or your page gets flagged as not having enough sources or being inaccurate. It does require you to bring sources, which versus Battle Wiki doesn't. So it's not very well moderated, and like the translations are very questionable. Like, there's a large community of visual novel fans who are not actually that adept in Japanese, or they can read Japanese just fine, but like their knowledge in English might be lacking, because their English isn't their first or their second language. So the translations are very questionable in quality and very questionable in accuracy. So yeah, the information is just very inaccurate and unreliable. And the bad thing is, this is what shows up when people Google these characters, when they Google these games, and people it kind of propagates. People eat it up, and later on go on to just bring it into discussions, and it's having wrong information, mistranslated information circulate in the discussion is very not good for it.
I should also mention that it's also actually getting translated into other languages like Russian, and at that point you already have double translation from Japanese to English to Russian, and that's twice as many opportunities to mistranslate something.
Yeah. Another issue, the other problem is less of a technical problem and less of a quality problem, as it is an approach problem. Because versus Battle Wiki is, in general, kind of is a practice I really don't like, because versus Battle Wiki is, and a lot of power level discussions in general, what they do is they basically take every setting they can, all settings, and write pit them against each other in a huge kind of battle and find who is the strongest character in fiction. And that's kind of a fool's errand because, like, different settings work differently. And when you have, like, when you try to compare One Punch Man to Demon Bane to Dies Irae to I don't know what else, to like Evangelion, you have basically 4 different forms of God or someone who's like fucking invincible, trying to fight each other and like asking who can win. So, you know, that's kind of already kind of dubious because, you know, the other problem is that they have like this really weird kind of tiering system for like to kind of resolve this. They kind of made their own tiering system of like different tiers of omnipresence or almightiness or how strong you are or how much you can like bend reality to your whims. And it's that in and of itself is very confusing because it's inconsistent, and what are they basing it on, and like what's the measure, and it's like says tier 4 reality bending. What does tier 4 reality bending even mean? How is it different from tier 3 or tier 5? These kind of things. It's like it's a really weird discussion that kind of tries to turn everything to numbers that don't actually mean anything. So yes, like the very approach of like taking everything and taking every setting in existence and pitting them against each other is very, shall we say, very flawed in from the get-go, from the lowest level of discussion, because it doesn't work.
Not to mention
so yes.
that it's missing the entire point of all these works. Like, as much as people may believe that Dies Irae is this chuny action visual novel which has these epic fights between all-powerful characters, it's not actually about fighting, really.
Yeah, if anything, it's about letting go of fantasy, letting go of fiction, being able to face reality with your own two eyes. Like, yes, it's that's another aspect, though I don't think that's quite as big, because if you just want to make like a discussion about power levels, that's in and of itself, that's not flawed. If you want to talk about who's the strongest character in Shinza, you can definitely talk about that. It's fun. That's why people do it all over the internet. Yeah. But versus Battle Wiki, in and of itself, it kind of like the methodology and the purpose and all of it, everything they're doing is, in my opinion, entirely wrong and unconductive to a discussion, and actually does harm by spreading mistranslations. So yes.
Yeah, basically one of the problems is that it's often the only source of information that people have on various works which are only available in Japanese.
Yes.
So to actually fight this problem, you have to provide your own content. You have to provide your own translations from Japanese, and by letting people understand it all and compare it to one another, they can actually get their own opinions about it and maybe get closer to the truth, actually.
Which is kind of what we're trying to do.
Yep, pretty much. And I suppose that about does it for today's episode. As usual, we are very happy to answer any of your questions, and we are currently looking for more topics to cover on our agenda, because we have already finished discussing the anime, we have discussed Wilhelm because of his birthday, but now we are kinda in a drought. So if you have any topic you would like us to talk about in greater detail, we will be happy to oblige.
Yes, so if you want to hear what we have to say about specific games in the series, about specific characters in the series, specific like themes, topics, anything that we've discussed up until now, and you would have
the music.
Yes, anything you would like us to like go into deeper detail in, lay it on us.
Yep. I again hope that Light will give us more topics to talk about next time, but until then we are basically reliant on your contributions. I can already say that the next birthday of the audio member is going to be on July 30th, so you can expect another character special around that time. But until then, we bid you adieu. Goodbye.
Goodbye.